So let us start our roundtable. My name is Alexei Muratov. I'm KB Strelka Club partner, and today we're going to discuss the improvement of the city-urban environment and improvement of quality standards in different cities all around the world. This is the topic that we would like to cover, talking about different geographical locations, and we've gathered experts on urban planning, as well as experts in the sphere of social issues. So let me introduce our distinguished guests. Well, let us go the counterclockwise. On my right is Mrs. Mariana Barroso Ferreira, the head of urban planning from Rio de Janeiro, Leonid Pechatnikov, deputy mayor of Moscow for the issues of social development, Cameron Sinclair, founder and executive director of Architecture for Humanity charity organization, which is a very specific emergency ministry in architecture. These are experts in city planning. These are experts who visiting different urban or city areas where certain catastrophes took place, and they help people get back to normal life. Namely, Mr. Sinclair have been to Krymsk, as far as I know. Mrs. Pushpa Arabindoo has just joined us, who is the co-director of City Laboratory of University College of London, UK, and next sitting to one is an expert in urban planning of different countries, Gleb Vitkov, head of project laboratory of the High School of Urbanistics, member of Social Council on Social Dimensions to the mayor, city mayor, and one of the most interesting and promising Moscow experts on urbanist, Mrs. Feifei Feng, Department of City Planning, Beijing Municipal University in City Planning and Projecting, China, also an expert on cultural heritage protection of Beijing. Olga, Vendina, leading expert of the University of Geography, Russian Academy of Sciences, and one of the few city geographers who is very actively working with architects and different architectural studies. Namely, Olga, jointly with me, curated the policy department in the sphere of the studies that we were talking about during the plenary session that Yuri Grigoryan shared with us. Well, right now we're going to have 4 speakers. I would like each of them to speak for no longer than 10 minutes, and after that we shall start the discussion on this very broad and extensive issue. So, Gleb, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. No, not really. Let me try the other microphone. Before we start talking about the quality of urban environment in the periphery, in the suburbs, let me raise certain key issues, and I see my role today not that much in finding certain answers to the questions, because we believe that unfortunately so far there is no extensive practice or success story in expanding cities or success stories in working with the suburbs. That is why it would be really interesting to listen to the experience of our foreign colleagues, and it would be interesting to apply to the Russian context. Well, as an introduction, I would like to deliver this presentation talking about the peculiarities of Russia and Moscow. Well, the key issue that we have is who is the one responsible for the future? And this is the question that we shall gradually try to answer. In order to analyze the changes in population of Moscow and Moscow region, and namely the outskirts of Moscow, We adopted an approach, namely analysis of the population dynamics, and we tried to take a look at these changes, at the growth tempo and the changes in the outskirts. Well, here is the primary belt, the primary cluster of Moscow region and around Moscow city road, and the peculiarities of the city itself. And we try to analyze the average in the growth of population. Well, the growth parameters and the construction in the city does not necessarily promise the growth in population as well. So we can see that starting from 1989 to 2002, Moscow and Moscow region was growing evenly. There's around 30 to 50% of growth, and the key areas that develop most actively are the ones just on the outskirts of Moscow, Butovo and some others. So starting from 2002 to 2013, the situation changed slightly. The tempo of growth basically remained the same, but the territories that are the source of active growth of population and active construction are increasing, and the majority of them are on the east of Moscow. And so far, well, as you can see it on the map, this is average data starting from 1989 to 2030, and we see most rapidly developing regions in the north, in the east, a little bit to the south. So these are the key areas that provide for population growth. So far, in these outskirts areas, this outskirts belt, we see a very large region where the population is starting from 100,000 residents. These are marked in light blue, with those with a very high density of population, more than 200,000 people. So they're cities in themselves, and it is important to consider the quality of life in these regions. So this is exactly the territory where the key developers operate. Well, these are not that large-scale companies that implement large projects with all the social infrastructure that are well off. Well, there are very few of them. There are lots of developers who work with large amount of territories. They are very different, and they work very differently, and there is no joint coordination between them. Well, now we've been over that due to the fact that the primary belt is more or less completed, then the key developers' activity is beyond the borders of this belt, and can be said that now the city is developed in most uncontrollable way. And we are talking about developers' activity primarily. So we can say this construction is very dispersed. The construction is taking place in small regions with minimum social infrastructure. So they created along the major roads, which is quite explainable, but unfortunately are not provided with social infrastructure. So here is an example of one of the projects that we did. Well, it is not really remarkable. It is very similar to the others that are happening in the outskirts. We worked with Kraskova village. The plots marked in red are under construction right now, and they already received certificates and permits for construction. As you can see, they are very close to each other, and they basically complete the latest plots of land that are free of housing sector, and the red frames indicate the territory that is about to be the platform for construction in the nearest future. The problem is that these developers do not adopt a full-fledged approach. They don't work with the whole project, that they just focus on construction. And it's not just some cottages. There's a 3 to 5 stories building. The majority of them is up to 15 stores. So this is our format of suburbia. And there is no social infrastructure at all. Not kindergartens, no schools, actually no shops either. And it is colossal work that the local municipal authorities are trying to force developer into making at least one kindergarten. So the municipal authorities do not have a resource in order to apply pressure to the developer and develop some kind of proper relationship. Further on, the issue of the quality of this kind of housing. As it was said earlier, it is low-cost housing. So the average flat is 27 to 40 square meters apartment, and they are purchased by young families. They take mortgage. The majority of them take mortgages. There are also lots of migrants. So these are people who can purchase that kind of an apartment. And just recently we have the examples of Kapotnya region, Birulova, and there is very difficult social situation. There is lots of social tension existing between the locals and the immigrants who live in these areas. There is no social infrastructure, there are no proper schools, there is lack of places in the kindergartens, so it all increases the social tension in these regions. The key issue, who is the one responsible for creating of proper city-urban environment, brings us to the key players in this process. This is the state management of the federal level, and the majority of resources is accumulated in this particular block. The municipal authorities of Moscow and Moscow region as a subject of the federation, and so far they do not initiate any kind of projects, do not issue any kind of grants for developers. Local management basically doesn't have any kind of resources in order to initiate any kind of project. Next one, NGOs connected with society development. Unfortunately, they are non-existent here. Well, probably the residents could come up with an initiative here. Developers and private business are not interested in that. They simply are interested in quick construction and sales. So it would be really sad if this situation would develop according to this scenario of unbalanced growth that is not accompanied by social developments. And so the question is, who's the one responsible for initiating of that kind of project? Who's responsible for the future? Well, this is it. I raised the issue. Thank you. Stop, Gleb. Don't go away. I have one question in respect of your presentation. You said that the municipal authorities, namely Kraskovsky municipal region, do not have the resource in order to apply pressure on developers. I do not quite understand this fact. Actually, the municipal authorities should have a whole set of documents that define certain parameters for construction projects, and they should focus that these parameters are well met and social infrastructure is included. So why would municipal authorities apply pressure on developers while the documents are still there? Well, you're right in saying that indeed there is proper planning, there are a set of documents, but unfortunately the plans set in this general plan do not correlate with the actual resources that the municipal authorities have. So actually all the decisions laid as a basis for these documents do not correlate with financial opportunities of the municipal authorities. So can we say that the municipal authorities are incompetent in using, and this incompetence is something that developers are taking advantage of? Well, I'm not sure we can say that. Well, the municipal authorities are obliged to, without having any kind of its own resources, to initiate different projects that foresee responsibility of social infrastructure. Well, actually, it is a dubious issue. Well, okay. Let us then stop this discussion, although I think it deserves further discussion. Still, now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sinclair, who is going to tell us about the activity of his organization, hopefully primarily on the outskirts of different cities.
No. Okay. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to just quickly thank the invitation to be here. Then I'm going to try and get this to work. And if it does, then we have a presentation. This is my second time back to Russia. The first time I was here, it's in 1986. So it actually was not Russia. So I'm going to talk about micro-interventions at the periphery. It's a good segue from the previous conversation, because quite often when the state fails the people are not beholden to the state, and there's an opportunity for public-private partnerships in which the community leads the development and actually acts as the filter for large-scale developers. Now, why do I say this? When you look at urban development, you don't often see the kind of walkable human environment. You see these kind of stark kind of gateway roadways that interconnect large housing development that have little social structure, as mentioned before. And so we're building destination cities rather than woven cities that respect the periphery. For the last 14 years, I've run Architecture for Humanity. I founded it to get architects, engineers to respond to the needs of the people. Over that time, we've helped about 2.1 million people, and we have about 35,000 architects globally working around the world. It's a very simple methodology. It's the idea that many communities do not have the social services that are required to create a strong community. We evaluate the needs. We come in with the architects and engineers. They live in the communities. This means that they could live in the slums or the favelas if we're working there. And then we develop that resource through private funding. We don't take any money from governments. We work specifically with private ventures. Collectively, we've worked in 47 countries, and I have offices in 7. I'm very sorry for the people here. I'm not very handsome, and the pictures are very nice, so you can look here. And if I had more time, I would talk about the holistic development that you can do on the periphery. This is in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where we're helping rebuild. I got 5 minutes? Oh, well, I got a lot to show, so this one we're going to go quickly. So how do you create a housing development that integrates jobs, education, healthcare, and also food security? One of the biggest issues we'll be facing in the future is food security. So how do we ensure that people have access to healthy, strong food? What we did is we flipped urban planning on its head. We made the citizens the urban planners. We funded them to do the construction, and we helped them in the rebuilding process. In this particular instance, we helped build about 5,000 homes and the urban development through the people. So I want to dial in closer. The idea of urban anchors is how do we create these little nodes within the periphery that act as the seed for development, rather than building large malls, which you see in Moscow. The ideal is let's build a mall on the edge of the city and people will come. It doesn't service the people within that area. This is in Kailicha, Cape Town, one of the roughest areas in Africa and one of the roughest areas in Cape Town. We used GPS mapping to map all the violence in the area, and then we locate the community structure in the most violent area as a way to take away ownership from the gangs and from violent crime. We ended up working in an area where women were traditionally had been raped and murdered and dumped, and that's where we put our community structure to own that land from the social ills. Working with the community and the kids, we helped develop the building, which had education, healthcare, as well as HIV/AIDS programming, which is a big issue in Kailicha. And this was interconnected with economic strength. Every community project has a for-profit business, so it has a revenue system. It's off the grid, and it integrates local culture, And as you can see, this is the building here. This was done for the 2010 FIFA World Cup. And the reason I'm going to show these projects is Russia is about to spend billions of dollars for the World Cup. And the question most people ask is, what does the Russian cities do for the World Cup? The question Russia should be asking is, what does the World Cup do for Russia? This is not an equal exchange. FIFA will make $1 billion off your country. You have to figure out how can you utilize this event to actually service the needs of the people and not the few. We've been able to do this to create safe environments, lowering the murder rate and the violent assaults in area, as well as focusing on urban peripheral areas. This is in Kenya, Namibia, Ghana, Cape Verde, Tanzania. Each of these buildings very low cost, incorporating health, education, and sports as a mechanism for social change. This is in Mali, Lesotho. All of these buildings were built in the last 24 months, as are the rest of the projects. This is in Rwanda, where we brought together Hutu children and Tutsi children as a reconciliation after the genocide. They were born after the genocide. And we have a game where there's no referees. The children have to decide on the rules. They decide on the yellow cards, the red cards. And then there's a gender game where only the goals from girls count. So the boys must always pass to a woman in order to score. So the idea of using sports and social programming. Integrating local artists so the community has full ownership and empowerment in the building. This is in Mozambique. We actually used lavender as an aggregate in the soil block, so the building smells of lavender. This is a $100,000 building, as you can see. And this happened all over sub-Saharan Africa, where we were able to help about 250,000 children. In Guatemala City, we again used mapping to figure out where there were not cars. We worked secretly with the government to change the road into a public space. Then at midnight, the architects and the engineers and the builders came in and turned it into sports facilities. And at 8 a.m., the social NGOs took over the street and turned it into a park. This is a $2,000 project. We built 6 parks in a month, and now there's a conversation about the rights of children to the access for play. In Haiti, using sports as a mechanism to integrate sewer systems and infrastructure as a way to limit cholera. It's a longer conversation, but in most favelas, communities will give up land for sports, but they won't give up land for sewers. So we built a sewer system that's interconnected with sports facilities. In New York City, we're taking over underneath bridges and underutilized space and turning them into youth facilities. This is a skate park we did underneath the Manhattan Bridge. So if you're ever in New York City and you want to skateboard, go there. In Afghanistan, we work with young children to create another skate facility. In order for the children to have access to the skate park, they also have 2 hours of after-school activities. As a result, 600 children use this facility. 50% use it to get skateboard, but 50% come to get after-school education. So you can see the dynamic change when you utilize sports. Education. I'm going to go through this quickly. 1 minute? Excellent. So as you can see, these acupuncture points can actually create strength in the community. This happens with education as well. Schools in Haiti, using natural materials that are made locally, that employ locally. So it's a job creation program as well as an economic node. This is in Peru. This is in China, giving education to migrant children. 9% of China are migrant. They have no access to education, so we're building these in the worker camps. In Dhaka, very instant schools that we can put up in a couple of weeks. And we've also known that when we integrate sports into schools, we can children perform 40% better in their education. This is a dance center we're building in Cartagena right now. And then the final one is economic anchors. There's no point in building in the periphery unless you create jobs. And you don't have to get Sony or Gazprom to move to the periphery. You can create micro jobs by investing in entrepreneurs. So whether it's street entrepreneurs, whether it's weaving cooperatives in China, low-cost for-profit healthcare systems in China, in India. In Japan, after the tsunami, we built a lot of community structures. This is actually a beer garden that turned into the community center. After a disaster, people just want to have a beer and talk about what to do next. Marketplaces. Have I got 30 seconds? Okay, I can go quicker. Alexei's worried about me. One more point to talking about the urban environment. This is Chicago. Chicago has an epidemic that's going to hit Moscow soon, which is obesity. Children that are under 10 will die 5 years younger than their parents because of lack of activity. This is happening in China, in Brazil, and in Russia. These are the 4 centers where obesity is going to take over and become a major issue for healthcare and education. In Chicago, after the recession, we took over old city buses, we turned them into mobile organic grocery stores, for profit. We put them in the poorest neighborhoods so that the families have access to fresh vegetables. So I'm going to flip through this because I have no time to show this. So this is about inactivity and that problem I talked about, obesity in the cities. This is something that's going to hit Moscow very hard in the next 10 years. It's hitting China now and hitting Brazil at the moment. So take everything that I've shown you of the last 9.5 minutes and overlay that into an urban environment so you create access for activity in open spaces, in land use, in transportation, in schools, and in public workspaces. And we can transform these underutilized, deserted communities into active environments that will actually create equity for a community, as well as deal with healthcare and education of the next generation. Finally, the project I'm about to work on is taking that same concept into Syria, and looking at how do we create deployable shelter systems and communities in an instant manner after and during a war. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Cameron.
Thank you, Cameron. I refrain from asking you questions. My proposal is to give the floor to Ms. Arabindoo and then Q&A. Questions and answers session.
Can you hear me? Is this the one? Okay. Okay, so thank you again for the invitation. Given the theme of the forum to explore the possibilities of success beyond the center and mega cities, what I will be doing in the next few minutes is providing an overview of how spatial boundaries and planning margins are currently being reframed in the Indian city of Chennai. If this works, yeah. Mainly at the expense of ill-defined political agendas, and how, as a consequence, this transforms the life and work experiences of those who are both resigned to live in the peripheries and those class of people who actually deliberately seek these peripheries as work and live options and choices. So in doing so, what I'm going to do is offer you not just a view from the south, and that doesn't mean that you have to turn yourself upside down to get this view from the south, but also provide you a first-hand narrative of how empirically engaging with the challenges of urban development in the peripheries of cities across the global south helps us to theorize urban contestations beyond the kind of obvious binaries that you're seeing in this picture here. So I'm going to use my empirical research work that I have been doing in the Indian city of Chennai in the last few years to set my case. The context of Chennai itself, for those of you who have not been to India, the context of Chennai in this scenario is in itself quite unique. Despite its dubious and rather reluctant distinction of being the 4th largest metropolitan city in India, Chennai, or Madras as it used to be known as until its name change in 1996, has emerged since the 1990s as a significant economic contributor to the country's growth aspirations. And this is steeped very strongly in a mantra of economic liberalism. So the resulting political economy of an entrepreneurial state has meant a fundamental shift in planning approaches to the city, one that cannot be content with itself. And this is something that Moscow is also struggling with at the moment, and the mayor seemed to make some references to that. But what is unique in the case of Chennai is this intense spatial fix that the city has been kind of rooted in and frozen with for quite a long time. And this spatial fix is no longer viable. So despite a decennial population growth that has hovered around 5 to 7% for most part of the 20th century, Chennai's spatial expansion can best be defined as modest. So its boundaries, the boundaries of the Corporation of Chennai, or the core of the city, was first defined in 1978. And for the first 200 years or so, this corporation boundary has expanded to only 172 square kilometers, a mere 2.5-fold increase. And you can see that in these boundary expansions. What happened in 1967 was, under the popular influence of metropolitan planning, again a phenomenon that Moscow is quite familiar with, a wider area of about 1,190 square kilometers was identified, bringing together a motley crew of lesser empowered local bodies all around the corporation. And this ranges from municipalities to town and village panchayats, which are very systematic to the way local governance works in India and perhaps doesn't work very much. The hope was that this would help redefine the relationship between the city and its hinterland in a more meaningful and manageable way. And it was hoped that all planning initiatives would now focus on decongesting an already choking urban core and offload new development interests into the metropolitan hinterland. What it meant in terms of defining this hinterland is that it was mainly proposals for satellite towns that constituted the bulk of the two master plans that were produced initially in 1975 and then subsequently in 1995. These master plans were of little success, with most of the new developments only witnessing partial occupation. Planning authorities have been little able to convince the growing middle-class population to move to the peripheral satellite towns because of the absence of adequate accompanying infrastructure, and the peripheries became more attractive to a new migrant population ranging from the lower middle class to the urban poor. This led scholars to speculate on a unique process of peri-urbanization in Asia, one that drew on portrayals of a degenerated peripheralization. So the periphery is seen as a degenerated urban condition, which is not ideal or a very sought-after phenomenon. But by the 90s, when the second master plan was prepared, it was obvious that there was an inherent convergence of metropolitan planning with the processes of capitalist restructuring and real estate development, creating a new phase of rewriting the city's relationship with the peripheries. So after decades of status quo, the rise of this entrepreneurial state has triggered some obvious planning actions in the last couple of years. And the first one was really to expand the corporation boundary from 172 square kilometers to 426 square kilometers in 2011. And then eventually the creation of a new mega region which could be anywhere in the range of 4,400 to 8,000 square kilometers. While this renewed confidence, this was the announcement that came in the press last year about this announcement of creating a new mega region to rethink the peripheries. And while this renewed confidence in regional urbanization might fit with the ongoing scholarly call in urban studies for rescaling the urban, where the urban is viewed as something that is simultaneously local, regional, and global, the reality is that the unique process of globalization, peri-urbanization, has been rendered even more complex as it begs to rethink our current problematization of the periphery. So what is happening now is that peripheries are transforming from being zones of survival to zones of investment, and they're increasingly conducive to super-induced global investments. And with the planning advantage offered by their unregulated fuzzy zones, they emerge as ideal spatial anchors for global capital. Thus, one needs to reconsider the earlier portrayals of degenerated peripheralization, where socioeconomic marginality is no longer synonymous with spatial peripherality. So this is quite clear in the case of Chennai, where two of the most important economic hubs, including the automobile hub of, if I can use the pointer, no, the pointer doesn't work. Anyhow, there is the automobile hub of Sri Perambuttur and the Special Economic Zone Mahendra World City, and they're both located just outside of the metropolitan area, and they undoubtedly provide the incentive for the creation of the Chennai mega region. Because global capital is being located in the peripheries, regionalization is seen as a way of embracing them and incorporating them. But such proposals are easier said than done, and especially when the regional plans are announced in a continued institutional and governance vacuum. So it is not surprising that the state government has not made much headway in coming to terms with exactly how the mega-urban region is going to be implemented and operated beside the simple exercise of redlining this regional boundary. Redrawing the boundary lines is no quick fix to social, political, or economic problems, as illustrated by the challenges meted to the fortune of a former town panchayat, Sholinganallur, recently appropriated within the confines of the expanded corporation area. So this is where I have been doing some research, and this is mainly my case study. At 9 square kilometers, this modest area flourished in the 1990s when the state government implemented an investment corridor known as the IT corridor, and real estate developments resulting from the circulation of capital attached to this section. This included business parks, gated communities, shopping malls alongside other leisure facilities. But at the same time, Sholinganallur is also notorious for housing the largest slum resettlement projects in the city, favoring close to 200,000 slum dwellers who have been relocated here from other parts of the city. As a result, its population has increased from 15,000 in the 2001 census to 300,000 in 2011, making it the largest electoral ward in the state. Speculations are rife as to whether this was merely a politically motivated electoral motive with little planning reflection. It's obvious that the social heterogeneity that is present here is quite difficult to discern in terms of any conventional patterns of urban form and planning. And it springs up all kinds of surprises where what seems to be a neatly laid out gridded town development that you see on the right side proves to be actually a massive slum resettlement site, and the kind of organic, chaotic urban form that you see in the surrounding vicinity is actually housing the new middle class ranging from the lower to the upper income categories in random and often unplanned developments. So while the mushrooming of gated communities in the periphery suggests a fragmented form of governance and land ownership pattern where planning empowers the real estate market and the elites, the presence of this tenement housing abetting these luxury developments reminds us of the continued process of double exploitation that persists in the peripheries through the process of social cleansing and marginalization, as well as the whimsical preferences of private globalized capital. While the trend of the rich and the poor existing next to each other in cheek-by-jowl circumstances might not be novel, in the peripheries they are an indication of an exacerbation of the unequal conditions that constitutes the heart of the metropolitan problem. So the simple binary that I alluded to at the beginning of this presentation, notwithstanding, the lack of basic infrastructure, ironically in a much trumped-up global investment corridor, means that the socio-economic patronage that the state and the bureaucratic planning system hoped would forge between the disparate classes hasn't yet evolved. So for instance, here you see a slum resettlement site right next to a gated community, and they don't have any relations. Instead, they are resigned to an uneasy coexistence, at best in mutual disregard, and at worst in violent confrontations that often results in blocking of access to whatever meager infrastructure that might be available, including roads, waters, and electricity. Just to summarize in one sentence.
One sentence, it's okay.
It's easy to romanticize a city not being at its core and being at the peripheries. But the dilemmas of volatile geographies of the peripheries are quite daunting. I mean, the urban is constantly being reshaped and written by the pressures of the regional and the global. And so we need to be thinking in terms of, not just in terms of simple manifestations of tensions between the haves and the have-nots, but looking at new forms of, how the myriad forms of polarization and segregation represent a new kind of fragmented heterogeneity. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Пушпа. Я извиняюсь за этот телеграфный стиль, но, к сожалению, в общем-то, регламент есть регламент. Пожалуйста, Леонид.
Sorry for this style, but we shall have to stick to our program.
Мне надо что-то нажимать, наверное, да? Спасибо. Добрый день, уважаемые.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Briefly, I'll tell you about what is going on in Moscow from the point of view of improving urban social standards as they've been defined. And I'll tell you about innovations which we have in Moscow, healthcare and education. Well, it took some time to build Moscow, and the building process or construction process was not heterogeneous, and the previous presentation actually demonstrated it quite clearly. And in different areas of Moscow, we have seen uneven distribution of social centers or social infrastructure. And this created a rather complicated situation when in one district of Moscow we have a lot of polyclinics, hospitals, and in another district where we have the same density of population, where the developers' projects have been implemented without social development or social infrastructure development, and this resulted in the situation when they were lacking polyclinics or hospitals. But the number of hospitals or polyclinics for Moscow in general terms was quite sufficient, and that's why for us the situation was not benign because of the fact that for the last 2 or 3 years we've received a lot of financial resources to change the system, to change the situation, but to build new polyclinics, to build hospitals without taking into account experience we've gained, we thought it wouldn't be correct. So we bought a lot of medical equipment, high-tech equipment, and from the high-tech point of view, from the high-tech equipment point of view and high-tech equipment of our hospitals, we're ahead of Great Britain, France, and we coming close to Germany. And I'm talking about Moscow, I'm not talking about Russia in general. Each district hospital or polyclinic, and Muscovites sitting here understand this quite well. So they're not all of the, well, we were not able to equip all of them with this high-tech equipment. That's why we created the so-called centers, or healthcare centers. We've selected just one hospital or polyclinic. We've equipped it, and several district polyclinics have been associated with these centers, and each of such polyclinic actually serviced 20 or 30,000 of patients. So they formed one polyclinics association or union, district union. Thus we managed to solve another problem. Well, if a polyclinic doesn't have a doctor, well, as a specialist, because he or she does not live in this area, so this makes it next to impossible to hire a doctor or this expert for such district polyclinics. That's why we created specialized departments in this healthcare center, and doctors started to work in the center or in different polyclinics at the same time, which make their service accessible for patients. And these doctors are part of the union or association. They service all small-scale district polyclinics which are members of such association. Thus, 250,000 patients are serviced by such umbrella center, which made it possible for the top managers to plan their budget, to plan their personnel structure, and their main task is to offer high-quality health care assistance or service. They have computer tomograph. They have ultrasonic equipment, but we don't have enough high qualified doctors now in such centers because it's a long-standing deficit, but we are planning using different systems of motivations, incentives, economic incentives. We are planning to change the situation. The average salary of a medical doctor in Moscow is 72,000 rubles. Roughly, it's $2,000 US dollars. So we are planning using these motivations and incentives to change the situation, this disproportion.
Вот здесь мы показали вам
Here you can see what one can use to get to plan his or her visit to a medical doctor. You can use telephone, you can use internet, you can use infrared of polyclinics. If you come to your polyclinic and you see that there is a long queue, you would have a possibility to go to another doctor, not in your own district polyclinics, but to another polyclinics next to this one. It will take you, it's just 2 or 3 bus stops away, and you will be able to see the same doctor, but in another polyclinics. Now, education. We've been forced to follow the same approach. What we used to have 3 years ago. We used to have 50 elite schools located in the downtown Moscow, in the southwestern part of Moscow, and these schools had a very good PR, very good directors or managers, and I'm talking about best of the best. And of course, parents tried to send their kids to this secondary schools, and actually it was up to the parents and their influence to send their kids to these schools. And there are other schools not that popular. That's why we started to create educational center, or when good schools with high reputations started to work together with low reputation schools, and we've changed the financing centers. Real money are associated with each specific secondary school pupils or student, and the result was immediate, and it was there. Schools became more independent financially, and talented heads of schools started to create new classrooms, new buildings, started to construct new buildings, etc. Presently in Moscow, we have roughly 900 centers, educational centers of this type, and we started to associate preschool centers to these educational centers as well. So we created a system which covers preschool, secondary school, pre-university centers. When best Moscow universities started to create secondary education centers financed by Moscow government, but kids there, well, nobody guarantees that they will enter these universities, but they are trained in order to be able to pass the federal secondary school exams, and university teachers are participating in their educational training. And this system, starting from preschool and up to the pre-university educational center. This approach proved to be successful and efficient.
Направлять. Ага.
Here we wanted to show you what we are doing for our elders in order to make their life in Moscow more convenient and comfortable. We've created patronage servicing or assistance. We are not building old age centers or centers for the elderly people, but instead of doing this, we are offering them services in situ. And that's what we've managed to do during the last 3 years. You can see many new territories, pedestrian areas. You can see how we've managed to improve our parks, and we are modernizing libraries. What we want to do is, we would like our elders to communicate with each other, not in hospitals and polyclinics, but in libraries. Quite often, polyclinics are used by elderly to communicate with each other, but we would like them to be replaced with libraries. And we also are offering them internet training there. And here you can see what the Department of Culture is doing. We are offering free of charge museum nights or museum days, and now a condition pre-qua non for educational centers is to organize visits to theaters for school kids during this school year. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Leonid Mikhailovich. I know that you are leaving this meeting, but Olga has questions or comments. You have the floor. No, we better stick to the program. I'll have time to react. Thank you. So let's stick to the program. You have the floor, Olga. Well, you are smart. Well, I'll do my best to use this forum to discuss general issues and not specific programs or specific elements. I'd rather discuss issues of a general nature. So, what can I tell you during this 5 minutes? First, what Gleb mentioned in the beginning. There are no successful examples of the development of peripheral areas. I do not share this opinion. Moscow periphery is a good example of a successful development. And talking about Moscow, one should recognize that we've inherited from the Soviet Union times. We've inherited a rather monotonous periphery, but periphery with a very high social standards of living and huge public spaces. That's why when we talk about upgrading quality, we are talking about raising quality which we have already achieved. First and second, who is responsible for our future? I believe that it's an ungrateful task to determine who is responsible. All of us are responsible. Looking for responsible or trying to point an accusing finger, I believe we end up with a situation when all of us will lose. Our today's society is a complicated phenomena, and when one is losing, at the end of the day, everybody will lose. That's why I believe that we have to base ourselves on common responsibility, joint responsibility. We've researched the archaeology of periphery, and our basic idea was the following: the upgrading quality of urban environment and periphery shall not mean it's the improvement of how it looks like or improvement of social standards. It should mean the higher efficiency of these landscapes, and the efficiency has different connotations: social efficiency, cultural efficiency, economic efficiency, etc.
So each of these directions clearly requires more than 5 minutes to clarify its content. So what are the ways to solve these issues? What is the main resources we have? The main resource is clearly population. In Moscow, this is a very well-educated population, and therefore the issue of involvement of well-educated population in the process of urban development is a clearly very accurate issue, and therefore all the methods of participatory planning that exist in the West and that are gradually being used in Moscow could be further expanded. Second important resource that enables us to increase the efficiency of landscape usage in the periphery is issue of land use. And we absolutely insist of the fact that issue of city space, the space required for living, comfortable living in the city and usage by all the citizens for their joint interests, should be an absolute priority. And therefore economic efficiency should be considered not from the viewpoint of developers and how much money they can make from this territory, but rather from the position of economic advantages, economic well-being, and profits from the fact that population might also implement their economic projects, or, as we've heard it in Mr. Cameron's presentation, different forms of small businesses development and entrepreneurship. I also would like to comment on one important thing that was mentioned in several presentations earlier that also matter for Moscow. Moscow, according to its size, is not only huge territory but also very large population. And whenever we talk about that kind of location that are comparable with a country, we are absolutely entitled to talk about regional policy. If regional policy is applied to the scale of region and intra-regional development and the state, it should be absolutely the same case in respect of a city. And in this extent, it should not be a policy of making everybody and everything equal. There are different tools for that. And in our conclusions, we insist that the policy that city administration or municipal authorities are moving should be very diverse and reflect the diversity in the social and economic situation in the outskirts. Despite the fact that we're saying that the periphery of Moscow, and we very often think of something rather monotonous, well, in fact, it is very homogeneous, and each resident of the city is very much aware of the fact which regions are more favorable for life, comfortable for living or not, and the immigrants know it very well which is a region for them, which is not. Well, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Olga Ivanovna. Now I would like to give the floor to other participants of our round table. And I would like to address Mrs. Barroso Ferreira. Well, at least in Russia, we have rumors that Cities in Brazil, or at least some of them, are developing very quickly and efficiently. And as we know, there are quite a lot of success stories and good examples of cooperation of city planners and residents. Could you please share with us some ideas and tell something more about this cooperation and what is the key for success? Is there a recipe for success that are more or less universal of that kind of cooperation?
Eu vou ter que dividir os 5 minutos que eu tenho com você, que vai traduzir, né?
В первую очередь хотел
Well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody for invitation, and I also would like to say that my speech shall be accompanied by translation, therefore probably 5 minutes would be too little for me.
Outros colegas, eu estava pensando no conceito de periferia, que no Rio, como é uma cidade linear, você tem a periferia que o conceito de periferia, porque o Rio é uma cidade linear e o centro está na extremidade leste. Então, acho que a gente tem vários... Fala isso.
So the issue of periphery development in Rio de Janeiro is slightly different from the conditions of other cities, because as for the organization and management of Rio de Janeiro, it is slightly prolonged, and the center of the city is located in one of the parts of this very long city. So as for the territory of the city, it can be probably separated into 3 large parts, and the key problem in the city so far is comprised of the issues of transport and providing proper transport connections between the 3 large parts, city parts.
Mas se eu falar em português não vai adiantar nada para ninguém. I understand that
we have nós temos... Ah, tá. Sim,
Можно и по-английски. In English is better because it will be more quickly.
Yes, but I think that my English is not so good.
No, it's okay.
The beginning it goes, but after it's terrible. I prefer to speak in Portuguese. Você tem centro.
Na região central, no centro do Rio, que é a leste, e na região sul, você tem concentrada todas as enterros, a maior parte dos enterros, e também dos equipamentos culturais e as amenidades. É a parte mais conhecida da cidade, é a parte bonita que os turistas veem. Ao norte, você tem a parte assim, mais industrial, mais de moradias populares, que é um Rio muito diferente do Rio dos cartões postais. E mesmo, por isso que eu falei no início, que o conceito de periferia tem que ser avaliado, tem que ser um pouco relativizado, porque nessas áreas privilegiadas, centrais e ao sul, você tem também muita desigualdade social, porque é justamente nas encostas das montanhas tem a maior parte das favelas. Essas áreas são as áreas impróprias para a ocupação.
Well, all, the central part of the city is most privileged and elite area, most densely populated and constructed. This is most attractive region for living, partially on the east and to the south of the whole city. While key manufacturing and industrial regions are located in the north, this is also where the majority of the so-called working blue-collar living regions are located, and they are also in the north. As for certain region, so the city seems to be very diverse. In this connection, there is huge social inequality and discrepancy between the north and the south and the east that we need to overcome.
Para resumir, que ele já me pediu para me expressar, eu quero dizer que as questões sobre periferia, sobre estar fora do lugar, sobre desigualdade, está em toda a cidade, mesmo nas áreas mais privilegiadas. Então, nós temos ouvido o colega aqui, Cameron, com a experiência dele, e eu entendi bem o que o primeiro falou, que é como você fazer um planejamento assim, numa escala macro e numa escala menor. Nós temos pensando nessa questão como o Cameron falou, nós temos as mesmas experiências lá. Nós temos um projeto que se chama Morar Carioca, que ele tenta agregar um conjunto de favelas próximas, formando grupos, e tenta equalizar os problemas de infraestrutura, de equipamentos escolares, de saúde, para que sirva ao maior número de pessoas.
So the issues of social inequality emerge not only between the south and the north, but also within the eastern and southern conglomerates of the city. So there is a certain level of social inequality even within the prosperous areas. And in this connection, the municipal authorities developed a program that is called Murakariuka, which in English would be like Home for Rio de Janeiro residents. And it includes the whole infrastructure of surrounding territories. So we consider the issues of macro and micro processes that take place in the social environment. And as Mr. Sinclair put it in his presentation, something very similar is happening in Rio de Janeiro. We try to tackle social issue, the development of education, involvement of residents in cultural life.
Nesses locais mais privilegiados, que têm mais bem servidos de infraestrutura, e só retirar as situações que são realmente de risco, porque você tem as áreas de encostas, as beiras de rio, que são as mais normalmente utilizadas. Então, você tirando o risco, você deixa as pessoas, urbaniza, dá melhores condições, dota de equipamentos urbanos, e o maior receio das pessoas é justamente ficar longe dessa área mais privilegiada. O que eles temem é justamente ser mandado para longe, onde o custo com transporte vai ser bem maior e a situação habitacional, ele vai estar longe também do trabalho e das amenidades das praias, de todos os equipamentos que fazem de lazer, né? Trabalho de lazer. E enquanto isso está sendo feito muito investimento, você está falando sobre o planejamento, está sendo feito muito investimento
So currently, attention is being given not simply to eliminate any kind of slums or eliminate all the migrants from the city border, but to focus on involvement of the population in active social life, involve them into working process, and take them away from these risk groups. So create more preferable conditions that would be more or less similar to those in prosperous regions of the city. And the state is investing a lot in creating of proper infrastructure, new transport hubs and routes, creation of opportunities for the poorest groups of population, and providing access to cultural events. So it is all focused not much on the development of the city, but is generally included in the federal program aimed at preparation carrying out of the Olympic Games. Thank you very much. We shall carefully monitor the unfolding of this program. And now I would like to turn from the northern hemisphere to the far east and focus on presentation delivered by Feifei. So we have very little time, so you could probably make some preliminary conclusions to our a bit eclectic discussion, and then I hope we would have 5 to 10 minutes for some comments from the audience.
Hello, everyone. First, I thank for inviting us to come here. And actually, I really like this topic to prove the quality of our life, because everything we do is the goal is to prove our life. Before I come here, because my English also poor, so actually in order to save the time, so I decided to express in English, but my vocabulary is not very good.
Your vocabulary is perfect.
My colleague, he will help me if I have some problems. First, I want to say, because this is the international forum, so I think maybe I can say something about some situation in Beijing, and you can learn something or know something about this. Now I want to say about the people who come from outside Beijing. Now Beijing has the population is about 12.5 billion people, and 8 million come from another province, and 7 million of them, they come here to look their jobs. So actually 60% they live in the outskirts, not the central city, and so actually in Beijing we haven't how to say slump. We call them urban village. It sounds good, but actually it's because all these people they only rent the house in the outskirts. The local peasants, they build their house and rent them to to these people, and so they have 市政社是怎么说呀？we have in infrastructure in this area, the electricity and the water and something. But only the condition, only the room they live is very small. Maybe father, parents, and their children, and also grandfather and grandmother. They live in one room, and the public toilet, public kitchen like this. So it's not the condition is not very well, but I just said electricity, everything they have, and I want to make attention that in this area, not all the poor people. Someone they not poor, they just come here to find a job, to earn money, and to learn the skill, and then they will go back to their hometown to make her develop. So, for example, in my room, in my house, my 小时工cleaners, my cleaners. She lives in another province. She has a tea garden, house, everything she has, but she still wanted to come here. They wanted to earn some cash, because in the land they just they can just food. So, but she lives in a very small room. Her husband, daughter, son, and just 10 平米 10 meter
square meters.
10 square meters. That's right. So in this area around Beijing, there are about 80 gathering. The people who gathering the people is more about 10,000, but it's not too big. They everywhere on the skirts. So and the government they protect the public 环境卫生是怎么说来着？environment to clean the government and to hold something about safe about this area, but just this Mr. And you just have a good example, because the residents, you help them to build their own community. But in Beijing now we are not very good in this job, in this work, because government won't hold everything. They want I can do everything for you, but when the government do more and the residents they want more, and they never satisfied about this, because they think, oh, you government, you have to do everything, but you example I think is very nice, because you can the residents they can 自治
there is a clear boundary between the government and the people. So people can do their own things to improve their living qualities.
So they will think this is my area and I do everything and I'll be happy. So I think we can think about it. Which one is good? Of course, the government should do something good.
Большое.
Many thanks, Mrs. Fan. Well, I think we can discuss this topic forever. Who is the one responsible? Which approach is better? Top bottom or bottom top? Sometimes the population simply cannot compensate for the vacuum of power in certain regions. But now I would like to ask the audience, maybe they have some questions or comments. If somebody would like to get involved in our discussion, you are very much invited. Do you have a question or comment? Would you like to comment? Yes, please. Just a minute, they'll bring the microphone. Yes, please. Well, I would like to ask the question to Mr. Sinclair. You said that you create different projects. You say you do. Who do you mean by saying you? Where the financing is coming, talking about construction. Who are the architects? I'm talking about primarily about the financing. Who provides financing for your projects? Which is most important for us?
Although my accent is English, my time in America has made me an entrepreneur. So I find all the funding, and I find it through different sources, either through private individuals, foundations. In the case of reconstruction, 50% of my funding comes from children between the ages of 13 and 18. They raise money globally. But quite often, what's been new is in the longer term development, the funding comes from the people themselves. And so they may not be able to pay me what an architect gets paid, which is why I end up wearing suits like this. But they end up investing in their community, and we underwrite the architecture and the development costs. They'll fund themselves, like just mentioned by Feifei, or in India, we worked south of Chennai. The community funds the materials, and and we help in the government liaison. And then by self-organizing and supporting, more funding comes in. So it's partly locally and partly international financing. In the case of Rio, we worked with Jorginho, who is a footballer, and he funded the project in the favelas.
Так, подождите, не монополизируйте только.
Apologies, please. We need to pass the microphone on. Are there any further question? Yes, we have a question over there. Yes, please.
While doing your project, did you find any opposition from the community? Because it could be not easy when a stranger comes and offer something for them. Thank you.
Yeah. We never go into a community unless we're asked. The only opposition we get is usually from the government or from, let's say, well, let's be honest, from the mob or from some sort of corrupt institution that is, people are not poor because they're stupid. They're poor because somebody else is making money off them. If you give them the support and the opportunity, they can work. So most of the barriers we find are organized crime or the government. And in some countries, that's both.
Друзья, я не хотел бы...
Well, dear friends, I would like to turn the end of our discussion into a press conference of Mr. Sinclair. If there are any questions to other speakers, you're very much invited. Yes, I have a question to Mrs. Arabindoo. We are the developers of the periphery that was demonstrated. Well, we've encountered a problem. Lots of Muscovites have 2 apartments. One of them is in the Moscow region. And additionally to that, they might have twice social support, both in Moscow and in Moscow region. Or from example of your megapolis, have you encountered that kind of situation? I would be happy to receive feedback from all the speakers. Do you have that kind of anomaly that there are 2 apartments, one in Moscow, one in the region? So double social support as well, 2 apartments and social packages. Because it seems to be a peculiarity of the Moscow region. Thank you very much. Well, as for second social package, I don't quite understand what you mean. Well, if we consider the seasonal migration, yeah, but but they don't go to the hospitals of Moscow region. Well, according to the new regulation, hospitals of the Moscow region should also provide Medicare to Muscovites if they have apartments in the Moscow region. And it is a huge difficulty for us because we have tens of thousands of population coming to our hospitals. So it is my big request to all of the speakers to comment on that if you can. Thank you.
In Chennai, it's not so much about second homes or second home ownership. You still have almost 50,000 units per year, which is in short supply in terms of housing in Chennai. So what you find in the peripheries in terms of the gated communities that I show is most of them are investments by the diaspora. So they are, they buy for their parents or families as investment homes, and then they either rent it out or it remains empty. So there are quite a lot of apartments in these gated communities which remain empty because it's a diasporic investment. For the city, it's desirable because they believe that the diaspora, because of living abroad, enhance and increase the quality of the environment. They make certain demands on how this quality of construction should be, what kind of facilities and amenities are provided. But, given the still short supply of housing in the city, it remains debatable as to whether you're building so much of housing targeting at a very niche market, and that is always going to be an issue. Comparing it with Moscow, it means that, you are targeting a very small niche sector here, and how does it play out in comparison with the larger demand versus supply question? I'm not an expert, so I can't comment on that. In terms of the social infrastructure, the peripheries all have hospitals, educational institutions. The area that I showed you is surrounded by private schools and colleges and universities, but they're not accessible to the slum resettlement sites because most of the time the urban poor are able to access social infrastructure only through a patronage network and a social capital that has been built over a long period of time. Once they have been evicted, they have been resettled in this area in the last 5 to 10 years. All their networks have been cut off, and they're not able to form those capital networks again in these new areas. It's a very complex political issue which planning has not been able to address because of the disjuncture between the power of politics and the power of planning. And so you find hospitals and other social infrastructure, but it's not accessible to the urban poor.
Feng, хотите что-нибудь сказать?
Anything else? Would like to add something?
Sorry, I didn't have a question. I wanted to answer the question because in Beijing, before also the Vendina, they said too many people, they come to Beijing and they take our jobs, and in Beijing the hospital is not for Vendina, it's for the whole country, and also the school. At first, the Beijing government, they don't allow the people who come outside, their children come to the local school. But now we think this is not unfair because 40% the children of these people, they have to stay in their hometown, and their parents, they come to Beijing to work, and their children in the hometown. It's not good for the relationship between the children and the parents. So now we allowed everyone, their children, they can in local school. But of course, the government have to expand the scale about the school, and also the hospital, and before in the community, we also have big hospital and a community hospital. Before the hospital in community is not very good, and now we develop this hospital, and people they can 分散说来着，
there are several levels of the hospitals. The good ones, the higher end, and the community hospital. We improve the community hospital, so the migrants tend to use the community hospital to satisfy their needs for medical care.
1 minute. So I think the people who come to Beijing, they are the motive power of this city. Because, for example, in festival, Spring Festival in China, almost this 7 million people, they will go back to their hometown. And in this time, Beijing is they cannot work. No people to give you the milk, the paper, everything we can have. That's why. So we have to treat these people fair. So we think. Okay.
Понятно. Спасибо большое, господа Барроso.
Thank you. Ms. Barroso would like to add something.
Has this problem. Rio is located the best hospitals and the best schools and the best of not even for the cities around, but even for the other states. Rio and São Paulo is a very important paper in all the country. In other states don't have the same structure, the same service as Rio and São Paulo. And as you said, we have the problem of as we have a great problem of transportation, and it's very expensive to go and to go in and return home every day. There's a lot of people that has a home in other cities or other cities or even in the city, in the nearest part of the city, and they rent a small room or space, or even in the streets. There's a street population movie that they have a home, but they sleep in the streets because they don't have the money to go and return every day from work. And it's a problem in Rio.
Ольга Ивановна, вы хотели добавить?
Olga, you would like to add something briefly. I believe that it's an incorrect approach. Each phenomenon has pluses and minuses. You could ask any governor what he or she likes to receive annually millions of people bringing a lot of money and spending this money in his or her area, but in return he or she should give them transport services or healthcare services. I don't think that governor would agree to that. We shall not separate social and economic development problems or issues. Seasonal character of Moscow population and Moscow region population. I think it's a beneficial phenomena for region and for the capital. One should be able to reach an agreement to create a common atmosphere beneficial for everybody. Thank you. Now we are starting to discuss Moscow agglomeration issue, unfavorable for Moscow and Moscow district, Moscow region authorities. Now I'd like to ask Gleb Vitkov, who represents the organizer of the session, the High School of Urbanism of the High School of Economic, to offer us conclusions of our the debates. Thanks to everybody. I'd like to thank Russian and foreign experts for their assessment of the situation. I'd like to share Olga's opinion. It's impossible to find just one responsible for the development or for the situation. Everybody is responsible, and it's quite interesting. It was quite interesting to hear the examples of how local population could be involved in this approach and how a development process could be organized with new employment, etc. Other urban development projects are of great interest for us, and I would like to continue this discussion, to discuss it further with the population and with the expert community. One shall not forget, and now I'm coming back to my presentation, the first one. We have seasonal population, but we also have newly built residential areas, and with social infrastructure and creation of social infrastructure. It's very important for Muscovites and for people of Moscow region. And first and foremost, we should discuss the agglomeration development, and the central function is not enough in the periphery, where we keep developing our town, our city, where we have new population appearing. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. See you soon.
Thank you.